Multiculturalism has normalized the cultures and ideologies that are entirely antithetical to the value of our founding culture, which is classical liberalism, which is freedom based upon individual rights.
In a recent speech to the American Enterprise Institute, UK Home Secretary Suella Braverman said that the policy of multiculturalism has failed. And I quote, "Uncontrolled immigration, inadequate integration, and a misguided dogma of multiculturalism have proven a toxic combination for Europe over the past few decades." Afterwards, she said, quote, "We have a great multi-ethnic society, and in many parts of our country, integration has worked, but there are also many towns and cities around the UK where it hasn't, and communities are living parallel lives. They are coming from abroad, they are not learning the language, they're not embracing British values, and they're not taking part in British life. We need to be fearless in calling that out," unquote. Now, this sentiment was also expressed back in 2010 by German Chancellor Angela Merkel and France's Emmanuel Macron. And yet the failed policy of multiculturalism prevails to this day. With us today is Professor Salim Mansur of Western University, who has written an award-winning book on multiculturalism, published in 2011 and called Delectable Lie, A Liberal Repudiation of Multiculturalism, which, by the way, is available on Amazon. Salim, your thoughts on what Suella Braverman has said?
My immediate reaction when I read the report of Suella Braverman from a few days ago, as you have cited her, was bravo, Braverman. Bravo. But it is bravo, and yet it is too late. It is as if, in the proverbial metaphor, trying to close the barn door when all the cows have gone away. So, and again, as you have cited, Angela Merkel, before she imported the migrants in the wake of Arab Spring in 2011-12, she opened the door and demanded all the European countries to accept migrants from the global south, that is the greater Middle East, Africa, and so on and so forth. And then David Cameron, when he was the prime minister, talking in the same way that multiculturalism has failed. So we have people like Suella Braverman now saying the same thing that was said more than a decade and a half ago. By the way, my book that you just cited was the first edition. The second edition is now out, which has been out, and I updated the introduction to that book. So if anybody is interested in getting a copy of it, which is available through Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, we'll be getting the second edition.
Yeah, I just happen to have this one that you signed for me when I interviewed you about it, 12 years ago. The new cover has the award on there as well. So don't look for this cover on Amazon. That's right.
That's right. So a little plug on my book. I hope that is okay with you.
Oh, yes. Perfectly good. Yes.
But back to the question of multiculturalism has failed. Yes, multiculturalism was designed to fail in the following sense, that failed in what sense? It has failed the culture, the founding culture of the North American society and European society. And what was that founding culture in terms of the making of the modern world? Is the classical liberal culture value. First of all, both Europe and to that extent North America, plus South America, is part of the Christian world. It is Christendom in that classic historic sense. There may be, and there are, people of background or faith tradition who are not Christians, or Christians who are no longer Christian. They've gone whatever direction they seek to go. but the founding culture was part of Christendom. Multiculturalism has failed that culture, and has failed that culture by design, because multiculturalism as a policy, as a doctrine, as an ideology, was fabricated in this culture that was once a Christian culture and a liberal democracy, culture of liberal democracy. And Canada is a pioneer country. The idea of multiculturalism was first pronounced and put in play right here in Canada, in the Canadian Parliament, during the years before the celebration of Canada's first centenary, 1867, centenary year, 1967. Prior to that centenary year, the government of, the Liberal government of Prime Minister Lester Pearson launched, in the context of Canada's own history, the Bicultural Commission, the Royal Commission on Bilingualism and Biculturalism, in 1963. And eventually, it was adopted. The policy of bilingualism and biculturalism became the official policy of Canada, that Canada is a bilingual country. By 1967, it was adopted. In celebrating the centenary year, that is Lester Pearson's gift to Canada, was that we pulled down our traditional flag, the Canadian traditional flag that had flown, through 1867 into the centenary year, the Union Jack, and we had the new flag, the maple leaf. So it is in that context, just to recall for people the origin of the idea of multiculturalism. And it is during that debate and a commission hearing that went right across the country, the immediate context for the Bilingual Bicultural Commission was the stirrings that had all the potential of going violent with what was happening in Quebec, the White Revolution that began prior to the Second World War, but accelerated after 1945 in Quebec. And to accommodate or to put a sort of a new social contract, political contract, in the two founding culture, the culture of the French, which was the Nouveau France, in Lower Canada, and the culture of the English that defeated the French in the Plains of Abraham in 1759, and Canada became British North America, part of British North America. So to bring together again, or to refresh again, the old contract between English and French as part of the British Empire, the B&B Commission, one can see, was put into effect. And the conclusion of the B&B Commission was that Canada is going to be a bilingual country and is a bicultural country. And that's well and good. That was the domestic consensus. That was the program that was initiated and implemented. But during that debate and the hearings, because this was a cross-country hearings of the B&B Commission, then when the B&B Commission went to the Western provinces, to Manitoba, to Saskatchewan, to Alberta, there they heard the argument that Canada is not simply bicultural or bilingual, that there are other European cultures that came and settled the Canada which is Western Canada, the prairie provinces, and as the prairie provinces were demarcated, first was Manitoba, and then was Saskatchewan and Alberta in 1905. And a plurality, if not majority, of the people in the prairie provinces were neither English nor French. They were Germanic, people of German origin, people of Slav origin, people of other Russian origin, like the Doukhobors. And so they needed to be recognized, and their identity, their culture needed to be also acknowledged into this mosaic of a country, and that the word mosaic very much came into effect. We had books like The Vertical Mosaic that was written in the context of the BNB Commission report. And for a long time, Vertical Mosaic was the standard textbook in colleges and university, in Canadian sociology, in Canadian political science. So the man who pushed hardest on this line of argument for the people in the prairie provinces was Senator Paul Usick. Senator Paul Usick, a progressive conservative senator appointed to the Senate, I believe, again, if my memory serves me correctly, by Prime Minister John Diefenbaker's government, that is the government before Lester Pearson's government. Diefenbaker came from Saskatchewan, Prince Albert. I mean, he was, I think, the first Prime Minister of Canada from a Western province, unless I'm mistaken. If there were anyone before him, I can't recall. But after him, of course, there was Joe Clark, and then the next Western province, or a family or a man that migrated from central Canada, from Ontario to the Western province, that is Alberta, was Stephen Harper. Mm-hmm. So anyhow, Paul Usick was of Ukrainian origin, born in Canada, of Ukrainian parents. And he argued that Canada should recognize, as it is going ahead with this formulation of bilingualism and biculturalism, the non-French and non-English population and their culture. And in that context, the Pearson government more or less agreed. And so Paul Usick becomes the father of multiculturalism.
Is there anything fundamentally wrong with his thesis that, yes, perhaps back in 1867, when the three provinces of Canada, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, formed Canada, it was primarily, almost exclusively, English-French. And of course, with a very small population of Aboriginals. However, we were talking about a parliamentary system, and the English and the French were it. So when we expanded in 1905, for example, with Alberta, and took in an area that had a lot of non-English or non-French ethnicities versus cultures, there is a difference. We can get into that. Then is what Usick saying so out of the ordinary that, yes, we were English and French, now we're multicultural?
Well, I mean, whether it is right or wrong can only be seen in the effects of ideas. Ideas come out in abstraction, you might say, and then those abstract ideas are turned into policies and the impact on the life of a people, of a nation, of a country. So a judgment upon whether it was good or bad in those sense, in the abstraction, fine, but it is in the effect. And that's where Suella Braverman, which is the mother country for Canada, by the way, and the English Parliament is the mother parliament for Canada. Not for America. America broke away. That was the American Revolution, 1776. Though America is the largest English-speaking country if we discount India, because ironically, India is the largest speaking English country. America is the largest, most powerful English-speaking country. But Americans are not all Englishmen. In fact, the English in America is a minority. The majority in America are the Hispanics, or is becoming the majority. So, yes, I mean, this is something that a commission, a royal commission, at the taxpayers' expense, initiated by the Prime Minister and the Parliament of Canada, with commissioners appointed by the government, who are technically supposed to be the experts on these matters. It was for them, in the abstraction, to work out the consequences of their ideas, both the positive and the negative, because any idea, when implemented, will have unintended consequences, and the unintended consequences are the negative consequences. I would always tell my students that one has to take into account the unintended consequences, because the intended consequences are consummated in the act. It is the unintended consequences that we live with. So in the abstract, when Paul Yuzik argued in 1963 for the recognition of other cultures that were neither French nor English, they were arguing, in effect, for some sort of a mosaic that would be our identity as a country. Well, America is a mosaic in terms of identity, Robert. The Americans are a melting pot of identities. It is a melting pot of identities, that is cultural identities, of Americans who come from all over the world. And the very founding value of America in that term is e pluribus unum, from many one. So irrespective of whether you're German American or Hungarian American or Chinese American, Japanese American, Indo-American, whatever, from the 360-degree point of angle of the world, the circle, you're coming into America, you become an American. You can cook your own cuisine, dress your own dress, dance your own dance, play your own music, speak your own language at home, have your own community newspapers and magazine in all the languages of the world. I believe in the school board of New York City, the District of New York City, there's something like 160 languages that the children come from. But they all are at least taught to learn English. English is still the language of America. There have been efforts to introduce into America Hispanic as the second language, but that has been repeatedly turned down. That doesn't mean Hispanic language has been turned down. It is Hispanic as an official language has been turned down.
Isn't that the salient feature of multiculturalism that we want to get into here, Salim? And that is that in the United States, we call it a melting pot, and a lot of Canadians have disparaged that term, thinking that, oh, you're going to have to give up your culture to become American, right? Which is not the case.
Not the case.
Of course, as you say, you can still, practice all of those aspects of your culture from the home country, the fatherland, wherever that you want. You are free in America. Freedom of expression, freedom of speech. You can do and say what you like in that regard. The one thing that you cannot do, and this I think is key, is that, and you hit upon it when you said that the official language of the United States, even though it is not enshrined as official, is English. And that means that the law is in English. It is not translated. It is English. And so you may be a Ukrainian American or a Korean American, etc., ad nauseum, but we are all agreed upon as Americans, I mean, we're in Canada, as Americans, they are all agreed upon that the law is the same for everybody, and nobody is singled out as special or inferior, while in Canada, that is not the case. We have two laws. Civil law in Quebec is Napoleonic Code. Civil law elsewhere in the country is common law. In Quebec, we have our laws, and in the federal government, we have our laws translated English and French. There's no single official language, so there's often confusion there. We give deference to Quebec. They have an overrepresentation in the Supreme Court. We give deference to other cultures because now, because of our multicultural policy, we actually support with funds from every other culture, ethnic events and cultures, from the Khalistani to the Ukrainians. And our constitution is a hodgepodge, a mixed bag, which I have said before to you privately, Canada cannot survive because of this.
Those are all, to sum it up, is the unintended consequences part of the discussion. That was going to happen. That was bound to happen. That's what Suella Braverman or Angela Merkel or David Cameron, after having adopted multiculturalism as a policy that was initiated in Canada, now they are scratching their head. What are they going to do? Now the problem has become massive. But the problem should have been understood at its inception. I think where I would differ with you, Robert, is when you said, I started making the point about language, two language, English and French, Napoleonic Code in terms of law in Quebec, and common law in English Canada based upon, the English history, which is what we adopted, which is we did not join the Americans in 1776. We could have joined the Americans. Your ancestors from the Maritimes were invited to join the Americans, and they didn't, right? They had the choice. As late as 1949, when your ancestors in the referendum could have voted to join America instead of joining Canada. So those are all water under the bridge. Those are nice academic discussion that we can have. But the point is that in 1759, British North America, when the 13 colonies were also part of British North America, that became the United States of America. So it was British North America that the Parliament of England, in making laws for British North America, provided for, accepted the French, both French language, French religion, that is Catholicism. The English were Protestant, or Anglican. I mean, the Church of Henry VIII had been established in 1500s. So there was that accommodation that the British North America would be of two people. Now, in America, there was also that culture, or that fact, The French were not simply on the Laurentian Valley, that's Lower Canada. The French were also in the Mississippi Valley. That's the Louisiana Purchase of 1804 by Jefferson, when Napoleon disinherited France by giving up the Louisiana, which was New Orleans, was a French port in the Gulf. Yeah. So in pursuit of his European wars, Napoleon sold his French heritage, right? So, and as a result, the United States of America became primarily English, Now, just do a thought experiment. If the Louisiana Purchase had not taken place, and Louisiana Purchase was accommodated in some sort of a contractual agreement, which is what happened after 1759 in British North America on the Laurentian Valley, then, again, the thought experiment, America could have been a bilingual country, because that's a contractual agreement, The Acadians of America, because down south they were Acadians. The Cajun cuisine, the Cajun culture is a leftover of the French culture, So again, history moves on. America became an English-speaking country, But Canada, from 1759 onwards, was a contractual agreement of English and French. And of course, that conflict at the micro level has played out in Canadian history. Remember, Louis Riel was hanged for demanding French education rights and religious rights in the Rupert lands, which became Manitoba. So it is even in this terms of the two linguistic history, the two cultural history, as founding culture, there have been conflicts. And the Bicultural Commission of 1963 by Lester Pearson was inaugurated, conceptualized, and pushed forward because, as I said in my earlier remarks, because of the gathering steam of the Quiet Revolution that had the potential of breaking out in violence, and it did break out in violence. That was the FLQ conflict, of 1970 that led to the first implementation by the Trudeau family, father and son, of the War Measures Act. So those are all the backstory behind this. But the real point is, where does multiculturalism come in? Well, the argument for multiculturalism came in from the Western Prairie provinces, and the father of multiculturalism, for our discussion and for historical purposes, is Senator Paul Yusik, a Ukrainian Canadian who asked for the recognition of the non-French, non-English cultures of the Prairie provinces. And by the way, all of those non-English and non-French culture of the prairie provinces were primarily, or in terms of majority, were European in origin, except for those Chinese that had been brought into Canada to work and build the railways, during the Mackenzie period that he launched to build and unite Canada. All of the others in the prairie provinces are immigrants and migrants that have come from Europe. And that's what Senator Paul Yusik is asking for, and that is accepted. And so it is accepted in the sense of a policy, but not constitutionally, because we are a bilingual and a bicultural country. So our official languages are English and French, and our two founding culture is English and French. And so a sovereign country, presumably we are a sovereign country, and that's a different debate, our parliament established that. So where did the demand of Paul Yusik go? The demand of Paul Yusik had a second life, and that second life happens when Prime Minister Lester Pearson is gone. Pierre Trudeau becomes a leader. He wins his first election with a majority government in the 1968 election. But when he goes for the second round of election in 1972, when he calls the election, the majority government dissolves into a minority government, and Trudeau is in a shock. He doesn't understand how come he lost his majority, And it is in that context, and I discuss all of that in my book, with all of the references, parliamentary discussion, political discussion, the liberal grandees, trying to think out the problem. But it is in that context of the minority government of Pierre Elliott Trudeau that Pierre Elliott Trudeau plays the card of multiculturalism. And he establishes, he promotes or promulgates the multicultural policy by recognizing that Canada, unlike United States, is a cultural mosaic, and that we are a multicultural country. and he is going to appeal to Canadians in hyphenated terms. So it is during that period, 1970, 72, 74, that multicultural policy is tabled in the House of Commons, and all the political parties at that time, the Conservatives were in the minority under Robert Stanfield, and the third party, the New Democrats, under Tommy Douglas in Parliament, basically accepted, agreed, because they would not stand up against this motherhood and apple pie coming from Western provinces, though Robert Stanfield was from the Maritimes,
Nova Scotia,
but most of the members in the Progressive Conservative Party elected to the House of Parliament, House of Commons, were from the prairie provinces. In those days, we also had the Social Credit Party from Alberta, quite a number of members of the Social Credit Party, something like at least a dozen members, if not more, from Alberta and Saskatchewan. They were all from the Western provinces, and they were going to support the idea of multiculturalism that had been tabled by Senator Paul Usick, who was still in the parliament at that time as a senator. And so the multicultural policy was adopted by the government for the government to push it. It was not a sort of a statutory or a constitutional adoption. That would come later. So the push began, and with the push, the open door immigration that began in the late 60s, and Canada started evolving in a direction that we talked about as a mosaic, and not as a salad bowl, and not as a melting pot, right? And to again very quickly capture all of that, Prime Minister Trudeau's multicultural policy was then given a statutory position by Brian Mulroney when he passed the Multicultural Act. I believe it was sometime before the 1988 election. And that statute, the basis of that statute, was then brought into the Charter of Rights and Freedom, Section 27, when the BNA Act was patriated in 1982, with the Charter of Rights and Freedom attached to it. And so we officially, constitutionally, became a multicultural country. Now we can talk about it. What is its effect? What is its effect? How has it played out? And what it means for us as Canadians. We are Canadians.
Let me quote to you some, going back to Suella Braverman, some quotes that could be germane to this discussion. She says that it is a basic rule of history that nations that cannot defend its borders will not long survive. And uncontrolled immigration, inadequate integration, and a misguided dogma of multiculturalism have proven a toxic combination for Europe over the past few decades. It's failed to allow its people to come into our society, and they live parallel lives in it. It failed because it allowed people to come into our society and live parallel lives in it. It has been too much, too quick, with too little thought given to integration and the impact on social cohesion. So I think that we're seeing this happen in Canada. I mean, I think that it certainly changes the face of this country politically. Like, I really don't care about your culture as far as food and clothes and dance and music and all these forms of expression or history. And it's okay to love the country that you were born into or that your parents came into. But when it comes to politics, that's what we're talking about, isn't it, Salim?
Yeah. See, we're talking about multiculturalism, and Suella Braverman is talking about multiculturalism, and she's saying that the policy has failed. The fundamental question is why, and what is multiculturalism? Because none of these people are defining multiculturalism. Even in our Charter of Rights and Freedom, Section 27, multiculturalism is not defined. What is meant by multiculturalism?
Suella Braverman touches upon a definition when she says that we are multi-ethnic, and there's nothing wrong with that, but multicultural is different. So she touches upon the term ethnic versus culture, which I think is very important.
Right. I mean, the point is, multiculturalism doesn't mean multi-ethnic. Multiculturalism has a very specific meaning. So it was not defined, and it remains undefined. People do understand what it means instinctively, but we're talking about getting into law, constitution, in our case, the Charter of Rights and Freedom. What is meant by multiculturalism? My book, Delectable Lie, was precisely taking apart, as an academic and a legal and a constitutional discussion, what is multiculturalism? What is to be meant by multiculturalism? And I called it a delectable lie. Now look, Robert, America is multicultural too, but America does not use that term. As we both agreed about it, that in terms of First Amendment right, America is profoundly multicultural. You could just walk into New York or go anywhere in the large metropolitan cities, and you see the whole range of cuisine, art, music, dress, people. Is multicultural in that sense, but it is not recognized legally or constitutionally. America is e pluribus unum, that is a multi-ethnic country. You don't have to be a blonde, blue-eyed, white, Anglo-Saxon or Germanic American to be an American, and the rest are all then Untermenschen. No? You are American from wherever it comes, and that was established and proven. Politically, people are debating that ever since, but when in 2008 election, Obama, whose birth we don't know where he is from, the first Black man becomes America's president. Right? It is a highly disputed thing that has happened in American politics. But constitutionally, nobody had been able to challenge that fact. And he was not only elected in 2008 with a majority, he was re-elected in 2012. So that issue is over. America is, and now we have the vice president, like Suella Braverman, of Indian origin. Her father is from the Caribbean, Jamaica or somewhere, and her mother is from India, South India, right? So that's it. Kamala Harris is a multicultural identity right in your face, as was Obama, right in your face, as I am, as you are, as a newfie Canadian, So, but it was not defined. And when you cannot define it, or you don't want to define it, is because you don't have any standard of measuring what is multicultural. And that's what I asked. I said, what? Because the implication of multiculturalism is and has been put into practice, and which is where we have arrived, and why Suella Braverman is saying that it has failed, is because multiculturalism in effect, in policy terms, mean all cultures have to be treated equally. Just as in terms of multi-ethnic, every individual is to be treated equally, irrespective of what is your ethnic background. We are a multi-ethnic country, right? So we are individuals, but we are individuals from different ethnic backgrounds or mixed ethnic backgrounds, but we are individuals. And as individuals, the law, the Constitution recognizes the right. So the fundamental basis of the American Constitution, and which was the fundamental basis of the Canadian BNA Act, is that everyone is equal before the law individually, right? That's the fundamental issue. So in terms of multiculturalism, it is not only unambiguous, it remains undefined, and it is that all cultures are equal. And so that's where we have arrived. It began right at its origin. All cultures are equal. You ask the question, By what objective standard? And there is no answer. So it's all subjective. So whether we are multiculturally all equal, the culture of Taliban, how do we judge? How do we appreciate and say, yes, it is all equal? So we cannot be, making any sort of discrimination not in terms of bigotry, but discrimination in terms of standards in application of law, because all cultures are equal. The cultures of Mohawk Indian is equal to the culture of the Anglo-German people who put man on the moon. And that's the problem. And Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who people considered, and he himself considered, to be a philosopher king in a Platonic sense, he was a philosopher. He was a jurisprudent. He was a Harvard man. For him, who would dice and slice every word, given his background, and that's why he's the father of the Constitution. He was the king in that final roundtable conference when everybody else, and Mr. Peckford, who's the last remaining member of that 11, will have a hard time acknowledging the fact that Mr. Trudeau just played with them and made them sign a document which he knew was full of, contradictions, and it could not be paper. And we have run into that the Charter of Right and Freedom, now we know, on the 40th anniversary of its patriation, the Constitution, that is the BNA Act, with the Charter of Rights and Freedom in 2022, on the 40th anniversary, we learned that it means nothing. And it means nothing, as his son officially declared, Justin Trudeau, that Canada is a post-national state with no core identity. There you have it. When you cannot define something, it has no identity.
So Salim, would that then explain why somebody like a Trudeau would applaud a Nazi, an actual living Nazi, in the Parliament, which he did just a few weeks past?
Exactly. And so that's where we have
all cultures are equal.
Exactly. Because as I use the word discrimination is a perfect word when we use in trying to understand our life, and we discriminate in terms when you go to buy a car, whether I should buy a Honda or whether I should buy a BMW. We discriminate when we're trying to go to a restaurant. Do we want to eat a Mandarin Chinese food, or we want to go and have an Italian pasta, in terms of our taste bud, instead of our liking? We discriminate on music, we discriminate on reading material, and so on and so forth. But the word discrimination in terms of multiculturalism has been turned into a term of bigotry.
Except with one exception, Salim, and that is, and I think this is demonstrable, that the culture of white British men is discriminated against tacitly by the federal government, where you can see sometimes when they post for a job, white men, English-speaking white men, need not apply.
So now, yeah, you're absolutely right. The Anglo-Saxons are now the target population in terms of ethnicity, ironically, in the West. So could it be that none of the native-born, native-stock English men and women in the British Parliament would dare to say what Suella Braverman said? Because they would immediately be shouted down as racist.
It is only because I think that she's of Indian heritage, even though she was born in London.
But she's ethnically
she could get away with it.
She's ethnically not English. So
yes, ethnically, yes. But I think that if you told her that she wasn't English, that she wasn't British,
she would agree with it. She's not blind to the fact.
Yeah.
No more is Kamala Harris blind to the fact that she's not. I mean, what was in terms of the founding ethnicities, and I use it in the plurality term, founding ethnicities of people in the 13 colonies in the making of the United States of America after 1776. What was the largest ethnic background? The largest ethnic background was from the British Isles and people of Germanic background. For the longest time, into the 20th century, early decades of the 20th century, the Anglo-German were the largest ethnic stock. You can run the name of all the people. You can see Eisenhower, Nimitz, the generals, Patton, so on and so forth, in the U.S. Army, Eisenhower, Roosevelt, Dutch American, right? Anglo-German stock, etc. So coming back to it, it doesn't matter because the world is naturally, but by its objective reality, multi-ethnic. So that is perfectly normal. We are dealing with a normal condition. The world is also multicultural in that objective way, but multicultural within a jurisdiction that is the state means, which was never defined in the case of Canada or in the case of England or in the case of Germany as they adopted multicultural policies, means that all cultures are equal within that jurisdiction. All cultures being equal within that jurisdiction means that you have to now coexist with cultures that are contradictory to each other. In the broader sense, I was asked on a number of occasions, or at least 2 occasions, to be an expert witness on this very discussion in the Parliament at the Committee for Multiculturalism and Citizenship. And these are all on official record. People can Google and find it, the presentation that I, among others, made. So I pointed out that the effect of multiculturalism, all cultures being equal, is the mixing of liberal culture, the founding culture of Canada, which is classical liberal culture, with illiberal cultures. Illiberal cultures are far more in numbers than the liberal culture, which is singular, the founding culture of Canada. And as I said to the honorable members of the Parliament, and I was being questioned about this, I said the result is precisely what happens when you start adding water to a bottle of wine. A point comes when it is no longer wine. It can be something else, but it's not wine. So that point has been made by the current prime minister. We have no core identity. The wine has no core identity anymore after you keep on adding water to it.
But he seems to say that this is a good thing.
Well, okay, fine. That's a judgment, right? So that's a judgment that the people have to make. Suella, Braverman, and others are making that judgment now, that the coherent identity of a country like Britain, based upon, the majority of the people are Christian, Anglican Christian. That is the state church. The majority of the people are English speaking. The majority of the people are ethnically, Caucasian. That is no longer true. And England is more or less losing its identity. If not, it has already lost it. In Canada, the same process is underway. That is the process that is underway in United States under democratic government, Democrat presidents, open borders, which is exactly what Suella Braverman is pointing out. That is pouring in of a population which is multicultural in terms that they're bringing their cultural baggage into a country which has to be recognized on principle that all cultures are equal. Well, one of the effects of all cultures are equal, in fact, in my view, the dominant effect of all cultures are equal is the normalization of those cultures that are illiberal, to put it in those terms. And then, we can go deeper into the question of illiberalism. All cultures that are basically grounded upon some variation of collectivism is in opposition to that culture which celebrates individual rights, which is the American Constitution.
There's also elements of individualism from all of the Western cultures, from Greece, ancient Greece and Rome, where we get a lot of our institutions and thoughts about the formation of a government as an institution, to nationalism from the Treaty of Westphalia, to Britain and the first Parliament in the Isle of Man, I believe. And these things are meant to take power away from kings and monarchs and rulers and give it to the people. And the rest of the world, they don't have that tradition. And so they are collectivists, they're tribal. They have grown up of thousands of years understanding that the individual is subservient to the state or the tribe or the whoever is at the top. While here we have a very entrenched notion that can only come from an upbringing, from an immersion and an integration of history, that the individual is an end unto himself. But look, so is this what you're talking about, illiberal?
The birth of the culture of enlightenment, which has a very narrow foundation in terms of its birth. Philosophically, it seeks to be universal, is, historically speaking, of a very relative origin. It is a very relative origin. You are going back to the period around about 18th century, mid 17th century, and the very first expression of the Enlightenment culture in political term is the making of the United States of America, because that's, the founding fathers were all students in that sense, and themselves, those people like Madison and Hamilton and Jefferson himself, the most prominent, were also political philosophers in their own right. You can see that in the Federalist Papers, that was authored by Madison, who became the fourth president of America, and Hamilton, who was killed accidentally, but whose animosity was with Burr, who became the vice president, I believe, with Jefferson, and they reflected two different versions of their own understanding of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So that means, what I'm trying to say is, within that enunciation of the Enlightenment culture articulated as the Declaration of Independence and then the Constitution, there were differences of opinion. Those differences of opinions led to different political parties, the Federalists, then the Federalist Democrat, and so on and so forth, if you want to go on. But the point is, no, this was not an idea that was thousands of years old. This is a very, relatively speaking, recent idea. The idea that you might be referring to, that you did refer to by going back to the ancient Greece of Plato, Socrates, Pericles, and others, that is 5th and 4th century BC, that is in terms of freedom. I mean, the very first articulation of the idea of freedom and free people was presented in what is one of the great speeches as recorded and reported by Thucydides in his grand book, The Peloponnesian War. Pericles was the Athenian leader, and he gave the speech. It was a funeral oration where he talked about those who died in this war against Sparta, this Peloponnesian War that spread out over several decades, where warriors, patriots, and others who died fighting for freedom, and it's a glorious speech. It is the first articulation of the idea of freedom, Athens and so on, the golden age of Athens. And here is the worm inside that society. The worm is slavery. That is the same worm that was inside the United States of America when it was founded in 1776, and then the revolution. It took a second revolution, as Abraham Lincoln talked about, in his famous speech at Gettysburg, which also happened to be a funeral oration. 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth to this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, and the emancipation of the slaves, right? These are historically very recent. This is a unique culture in that sense. This is no longer taught in American and Canadian schools. I was a professor and a member, a tenured member, faculty member for 4 decades in one of the premier Canadian universities. It's only few of us in the university that talk about this, because we have become a collectivist country.
The difference I see between the United States and Canada in this regard is why they were very slow in changing into a multicultural, globalist philosophy at the top, which they now have, was that they have a lot of stories. Mind you, they're 10 times bigger than Canada, but they had stories of bravery and of freedom and of individualism, and they idolized their founding fathers, and they wrote stories about them, which they taught in school. I don't remember ever reading about Canadian founding fathers. I bet you if you ask anybody out there other than Joey Smallwood, they'd never be able to say who a Canadian founding father is.
Our stories in Canada is the story of Anne of Green Gables that our children read in grade school, in grade 2, 3, as they begin. Our children don't read the stories of Patrick Henry, give me freedom, or give me liberty, or give me death, So we split. That is, British North America split as a result of 1776. And it was our founding fathers and their ancestors. Our founding fathers are 1867, but the people, that is your ancestors in the Maritimes, and those in Upper and Lower Canada, they rejected the appeal of the people of 1776, because those appeals were made, right? They rejected it, and they were loyalists. Loyalists to whom? Loyalists to what? They were loyalists to the British, including the French Canadian were loyalists to the British, right? So, and then those members of the 13 colonies who were loyalists to the British, they moved north. They moved and came north, So when you're driving down McDonald-Cartier Highway, which we in Ontario call 401, when you ride, you see those plates on there, of the Loyalist Highway, right? So, yeah, I mean, I'm forgetting the name of Benedict Arnold, General Benedict Arnold, under George Washington, began his career as a patriot, that is in the 76 war. And then he turned back on it and he became a loyalist. So that's in the language now. You are a Benedict Arnold, you're a traitor.
Mm-hmm.
Benedict
In fact,
Arnold.
the motto, I think, of Ontario, your province, is loyal she remains, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the Simcoes and so on and so forth, they're loyalists. They came from America. Colonel Talbot, the famous Talbot Trail in southwestern Ontario, Colonel Talbot was a loyalist. He came from the South and he fought the Americans.
My point, Salim, is that you, as a professor of political economics and history, you know these people. But the person out there on the street, it's almost like you see the man on the street interviews in the United States on July 4th. What are we celebrating? I don't know. That's America today. But you go back 50 years, everybody knew why you were celebrating July 4th. Today in Canada, there's no understanding of Canadian history.
Correct. So this is what has happened, because there has been, on the basis of the idea and doctrine of multiculturalism, in America, the resistance to multiculturalism is still constitutional. So the America First people, going back to before World War II, that is during the period after World War I, the America First people, they insisted that America will remain a republic based upon the founding values, and that current is still there. The America First argument was revived under Donald Trump, So, and that is the resistance. And so long the American Bill of Rights is not abridged or altered through amendment, then those 10 amendments are the autoimmune in the American Constitution against multiculturalism. People can argue this, the back and forth, but America remains, at least as of now, as we are speaking, still a country that is multi-ethnic.
Well, let me just give you a quote before we continue, Salim, from Braverman. She says, "I believe that the nation state is one of humanity's great civilizing forces. It creates a shared identity and a shared purpose, and that does not need to have a racial component." So in other words, she's recognizing, as you are, that multi-ethnic is fine. It is the way of the world. It is the way of humanity. Multicultural is different, and I think we've defined what we now mean by that.
Multi-ethnicity is as real as gravity. You cannot deny it. So it is there. It is a reality. The world is multi-ethnic, but within the making of a nation state, the birth of a nation state is also a very recent phenomenon historically. It is as recent as the end of the religious wars in Europe, at least officially, by the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. And so that's about 400 years, less than 400 years. Okay, we are approaching the 400th anniversary of 1648. So it is a blimp in terms of world history of, say, 10,000 years. So in terms of nation state, a state that is English, French, Italian, and so on and so forth, as it evolved after 1648, reflects the ethnicity that is English, French, Italian, and so on and so forth, Spanish, right? And that ethnicity is expressed in the specific language, English, French, Italian, Spanish, just for argument's sake, okay? So, yeah, and within that state, the culture of that ethnicity is then encouraged, invested in, developed, evolved, so on and so forth, So the English culture, grew in terms of its own, that is in England, that is in the British Isle, grew from before 1648, but after 1648, it became more and more consolidated. 1648, as again, talking in terms of historical timeline, 1648, end of Treaty of Westphalia. 1649 is the beginning of the English Civil War that led to the decapitation of Charles I. To give you another example, and a very important example, not because I come from that part of the world, but again, simply a reality of it, is India. India is a completely multi-ethnic society, but modern India, which is an invention in that sense of the British, when they left India, they partitioned it, they created out of India two countries, now three countries, which is Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. But India is the largest functioning democracy. The idea of democracy, a parliamentary government, of a republican constitution, India's constitution is republican, is not of Indian origin. It is an imported idea. And India is today the world's largest functioning democracy, but it is not a multicultural country. It is multi-ethnic, it is multicultural, but it's not officially multicultural, because if it becomes official, it will end up like Justin Trudeau's post-nation state with no core identity, splitting into 50 different countries. So here is the fatal problem that we come to in this, if I have been able to put together the argument. The fatal problem is, which I pointed out in my book, will be competing identities leading to competing demands by people who will insist upon the evaluation and valuation of their cultural identity, whether it is the soup of those letters, LGBTQ plus, or it is, I am an Indian, I am a Chinese, so I'm an Indo-Canadian, I am a Chinese-Canadian, and so on and so forth. And that simply multiplying over time, in which the hyphenated identity of an individual, which is, in my case, say, Indo-Canadian, the Canadian will dissolve. It's like wine and water mixing, will over time dissolve as the Indo identity is amplified, which is what we are seeing happening,
As a matter of fact, wasn't it just a few weeks ago that the Khalistanis near Toronto set up their own country, and no non-Khalistanis or no Sikhs allowed?
Correct. And again, India is vast and diverse, and within that there are positive aspects of it and there are negative aspects of it. And it is the negative aspects that is going to be the most disturbing, just as you have mentioned, the Khalistani.
Or the Tower Hamlets in London, which is a no-go zone, as they say.
Oh, yes. In France, in Netherlands, in Canada, it is developing. In other words, what Suella Braverman is talking about out of the English experience or the British experience, parallel societies. That's a very nice way to express the term ghettos of Ban Louis. So it is neutral, it is nice, it doesn't get anybody agitated, parallel societies. So yes, England is full of parallel societies, and which means if you are from one society that is in hostility with the parallel society there's another, then you better watch out going there, and so on and so forth. So what it is the recreation, and I use the term normalization of tribalism within the nation state. Nation state is itself a tribe, but it is a tribe, back to America, e pluribus unum, we are one tribe, irrespective of where we come from.
It's based on laws, not
skin color. Of course. Tribes have their own laws too. Again, there has to be a standard of measure, but in multiculturalism, there is no standard of measure, right? So tribes have laws, and I don't belong to that tribes, but I respect the laws. It is their laws, So in a world, we are close to 200 countries in terms of borders and recognition and flag and so on, and seat in the United Nations. I have no desire to go and live, for instance, in what our government is spending money in Ukraine, $9 billion, according to Justin Trudeau. I have no desire to go and live or visit Ukraine, a tribal society where the Azov battalion parades with Nazi symbols, right? But it is their business. They can have it. The world is diverse. Fine. Go ahead and have your Azov battalion and Nazi flag. But in Canada, when that happens, we are in big trouble. And that is exactly what has happened. The event in the parliament, and nobody of the 338 member parliament paused for a moment and remained in his or her seat and refused to join the clapping like seals when Speaker Anthony Rota introduced what was his name, Yaroslav Hunka, as a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero who fought the Russians during the Second World War. Nobody paused and said, what? We're standing up to clap for a man who fought the Russians in the Second World War? Well, the Russians were the Soviet Union was our ally, and we were fighting the Nazi Germany. And who are we clapping? We're clapping a Waffen SS member. Nobody paused. And that's what I mean by normalization. Multiculturalism has normalized the cultures and ideologies that are entirely antithetical to the value of our founding culture, which is classical liberalism, which is freedom based upon individual rights.
So there's the standard, isn't it?
And that's the standard. That is the standard. But we have done away with that standard because we have put in, that means we have become a bundle of contradiction. We have put into our Charter of Rights, Section 27, multiculturalism. So here it is, my mother, my grandparents, that is the women, as a child, I saw growing up that when they went out of their natural home, their surrounding, when they went out into the street, to the market or anywhere, or when they were visiting people and they got into the car and they were driven, they covered their hairs. My mother covered her hair. That is instinctive, that was cultural, that is what it is, But there were women, including in my family, who not only covered the hair, but did the face covering or wore a burqa, depending upon their age, depending upon their habits. My mother never wore a burqa, but my mother, the edge of the sari, the Indian women wear sari, went over her head. My sisters and others, they never did that. But what I'm trying to say, this was part of a culture. Other parts of the culture of the world of Islam or the Muslim world, women are totally covered. That is their culture. That is their right.
To that point, Salim, you're bringing up a memory. I was raised Roman Catholic, and of course, as we entered the church, the women would put on their hats and the men would take them off.
Take them off.
It was quite comical as they walked in the door. It was an instinctive cultural expectation. Absolutely. A man does not wear a hat inside. You doff your cap. And a woman does not go into church with a bare head. She would have to, even if she had like a bandana, a kerchief, she would put that on her head if she didn't have her hat.
Precisely, and men might have their own dress codes and variation. But the point I was driving at, this issue came to a head in the period after 9/11. in this country,
Hmm.
right? And it went as far as the federal court, because our government, elected government, it was a conservative government of Stephen Harper that took this woman, or rather, this woman took the government of Stephen Harper. The minister was Jason Kenney, the minister of citizenship and immigration, to court. Why? Because the minister Justin Kenney had the rule passed in his ministry that there should be no face covering, head covering during the citizenship ceremony and oath taking. That's a very formal occasion. And this woman from Ontario, from Mississauga, insisted to have her face covering and head covering during her citizenship ceremony. And Jason Kenney's government was not going to accommodate her. So she went to the courts. And the federal court ruled in her favor, according to Section 2 something, which is about her right in terms of her personal right, freedom of worship. And then on the basis of multiculturalism, So there we have it. We have that. And Jason Kenney did not appeal to the Supreme Court, because if he had appealed to the Supreme Court, he would have lost. So the federal court was the court it went up to, ultimately. The point I'm saying is, so this has been normalized, Now we can agree, and we do agree, you and I believe we do agree that, on the basis, we don't have an equivalent of a First Amendment in Canada, but on the basis of the principle of First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of belief, freedom of association, therefore the freedom of dress, an individual has the right to do what he does without interfering with the rights of others, right? And so if the woman is going to have a face covering, have a head covering, that is an individual right. We are a country of freedom based upon individual right. But then that right has some sort of limitation when it comes to the demand of public position. There are codes. And so within that, there has to be some accommodation. Fine. But how do you accommodate, ultimately, take the extreme example? In the American case, you have the right to burn the flag. In the American case, because that's freedom of speech. In the American case, you have the right to carry a swastika. That is again, freedom of speech. All of these things have been tested in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court have come down with the decision. But you don't have the right to go and disrupt others with your freedom. Others also have their rights, and so on and so forth. But how do you accept in a culture such as America and Canada, based upon common law, based upon freedom, based on individual rights, how do you accept a Nazi fascist culture and say this is fine, we can coexist? Because this issue, again, came to a head in Ontario on the basis of multiculturalism, that the demand was there to have Sharia courts. And before anybody accuses me that I'm equating a Sharia court and Sharia law with Nazism, that's not what I'm doing. I mean, each culture, each people have their own specific culture. So Muslims have their, or those Muslims, fundamentalist Muslim would want to have Sharia law in the country. to be recognized and to have some ways of implementing them. How are we going to reconcile all of these things? These are all of the problems that, in effect, Suella Braverman is suggesting, because in England or in Great Britain, the issue of Sharia law has been supported by the archbishops of Canterbury. It has been supported in the House of Lords. The only question is at what point of time the British government is going to recognize in the House of Commons and establish Sharia courts, which will then lead to establishing or appointing justices who are experts in Sharia law, right? If that happens in Canada, then that will be our issue also over here. Our means the Canadians of Muslim background and Muslim origin are going to make that demand. Then if Muslims can demand Sharia law courts, why can't the Hindus demand, the Manu law, which is the Hindu law, be implemented? And so we have those demands going through the system. But here we are with 338 members standing up and giving a standing ovation to a Nazi. And that is all right, because, this is our parliament. The precedent has been established, and we might try to, as Prime Minister Trudeau is trying to squeeze himself out of this dilemma, he will, and given our memory as a people, which has basically a half-life of 10 seconds, is already history, So the question is the normalization. The Western world has normalized Nazism because we are in full embrace of the Ukrainian Nazis, supporting them with tens of billions of dollars. America has already invested over $100 billion and more is in the pipeline. All the European countries that at one time fell under the heels of goose-stepping Nazis are lined up behind Zelensky and supporting him. There are exceptions. Viktor Orban is, for instance, an exception. The man who has been re-elected as Prime Minister of Slovakia is an exception. But the exception proves the rule that the European states are in full embrace of Nazism. And anybody who opposes Nazism now is therefore going to be prosecuted or can be prosecuted, But the story is even darker than the current story. In the case of Canada, we have talked about that we brought in Ukrainian Nazis into the country as part of the deal that was made by the Allied power, Britain and United States, when the war ended in 1945, through the rat line to bring in Ukrainian Nazis. Specifically, I'm talking about Ukrainian Nazis. There were German Nazis that went through the rat line into Latin America. People like Adolf Eichmann, or Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, etc., etc. The Ukrainian Nazis were brought to the Five Eye countries, as was Yaroslav Hunka, under the radar, silently complicit with the Western governments, that is the Allied powers, who rescued these people instead of handing them over to the Russians, to the Soviets, because they had committed war crimes against the Soviets and against the Poles and against the Jews. We brought them to use them in our future conflict with the Soviet Union, which was already germinating in terms of the Cold War. All right. So among them, there were a whole lot of these. Among the people like Hunka, there were a whole lot of them. People like Peter Savarin, who was likely a comrade in arms in the Waffen SS Galician Brigade division with Yaroslav Hunka. Yaroslav Hunka was born in 1925. This man, Peter Savarin, was born in 1926, so 1 year age different. They were teenagers when they joined the Waffen SS during the Second World War, and they came to Canada as barely out of their teenage years in 1945, and they became Canadians. And nobody vetted them, nobody questioned them, and so on, to the extent that Peter Savarin he became a lawyer in Canada, rose to become the Chancellor of University of Alberta, and was awarded the Order of Canada. Where's the story of the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland's grandfather? You know, he was not given the Order of Canada, but his granddaughter has become the Deputy Prime Minister and could become the Prime Minister.
Although
she has not disavowed Nazism. She has not disavowed. That's the point I'm coming at.
I was going to say that we shouldn't necessarily ascribe to a person the sins of the father, but in Chrystia Freeland's case, we can, because she's demonstrated.
Exactly the point. You know, I cannot be contaminated, or you cannot be contaminated by what happened in the lives of our grandfather or even our father or mother. You know, the child is not to be held responsible for the action. Each individual is to be held responsible for their action, you know. So, but if I am running for public office and my grandfather was a Ukrainian Nazi working for SS Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler, then it is not only very right of you as a voter, Robert Vaughan, but it is for the political party, for the country, to vet me and to ask me whether I have disavowed in every way the ideology, the culture, the values of what made my grandfather a deputy to SS Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler. Has anybody done that with Chrystia Freeland? The answer is no. No, even after this fact is an open public knowledge. No, even after the fact that she was in 2022, when the special military operation began in Ukraine, holding public rally in Canada, in Toronto, in Alberta, waving Stephen Bandera's flag, black and red, blood and soil, right? So that is the normalization process that has gone on. So we have normalized that. We have normalized Khalistani, our leader of opposition that is keeping the minority government of Justin Trudeau in government. Jagmeet Singh, as far as I know, cannot travel to India, will not be given a visa to travel to India for his association with the Khalistani movement, Khalistani Sikhs, that is at war with India, and that the members of the Khalistani movement were responsible for the murder of the Indian Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi. And that subsequent to that murder of Mrs. Gandhi, the worst terrorist operation before 9/11 was planned, arranged, and executed by Khalistani members right out of Canada in bringing down an Air India 747 in 1985 with Indo-Canadians in the plane, over 350 passengers and crew. And these people are still moving around.
They only got one.
The Prime Minister and others.
They only got the bomb maker, didn't they?
Pardon me?
I say the only person convicted of that affair was the bomb maker.
Oh yes, the bomb maker was convicted under the prodding of the Indians. But before the bombing was done, what happened? That criminal activity, terrorist activity, was carried out before the Prime Minister of India was killed. The Indian government was informing, asking, warning the Canadian government and the Canadian parliamentarians to be aware of the activity of the Khalistanis, because Canada had become the base of operation for the Khalistani, and neither the liberals nor the conservatives, progressive conservatives, nor the NDP. We're going back to the government of Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the father of the current Prime Minister, the government of Prime Minister Joe Clark, for that period of time that he was the Prime Minister after the 1979 election, to the government of Prime Minister Brian Mulroney when he got elected in 1984 to 1991, 92. And subsequently, the governments of Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin Jr., Stephen Harper. Because all of these leaders and their party members have made a beeline to the temples and gurdwaras of the Punjabi Sikhs. Many of them are the hothouse of the Khalistani movement. So we did not give Order of Canada to Jagmeet Singh as we gave Order of Canada to Peter Savarin, but we have normalized this entire anti-Canadian value, if we had a value, which we did, value based upon freedom based on individual rights, common law, and so on. But that's all gone off the board. That is the ultimate effect of multiculturalism for us, for England, as Suella Braverman says, for Germany, as Angela Merkel has said, and so on and so forth. The normalization of fascism.
Yes. Suella Braverman, as you recall in the quote that I said that we have to be fearless in calling this out, the policy of multiculturalism. And I think that you are fearless. And thank you for your comments, and thank you for your book, Delectable Lie. Mind you, it's 12 years old now, but in second printing. So
that's the first edition you have.
This is the first edition, yes. You get the second edition at Amazon.ca or Amazon.com too, I would imagine. But
yes,
it is available. Thank you, Salim. Fascinating.
Thank you.